Call to order a regular meeting for the normal town council for.
No. Mindy's like, what?
My wife says we've got another 2 minutes or so.
And we have a new clock, so it should be accurate. Oh, he's going to go get him.
Today is my son's birthday, so I keep writing the date as 8/5/97. You're just like, for his birthday, I'm like,
It's funny. It does. It gets so ingrained, and that's like the only, yeah.
Here these days.
did you have any public commenters sign in?
I am bringing them back.
Look at you.
Call to order a meeting for the normal town council for August 5th, 2019. Please call the roll.
Mayor Coos?
Here.
Mr. McCarthy?
Here.
Mrs. Cummings? Mr. Nord?
Here.
Ms. Smith? Mrs. Lorenz? Here. Mr. Preston?
Here.
We'll begin with a pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First, we have no requests for public comment, so we go to the omnibus agenda. Items considered routine in nature and will be handled with one vote unless a council member would like to pull an item for discussion. I would like to be excused on voting on any bills I may have incurred in my duties as mayors, and I would like to point out approval of the minutes of the regular meeting. There is an amended set of minutes at your table, so those are the minutes we will be voting on.
Move approval. Second.
Thank you. Mr. Nord?
I'd like to remove some.
Sure.
B through H.
Be like boy.
B
B as in boy. Through H.
through H?
Yes.
But
I've got some that Karen had notes on that she wanted me to.
All right. So much for an omnibus agenda. Please call the roll.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mr. Nord?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mayor Coos?
Aye. We have approved the minutes of the regular meeting. Item B is an approval of town of normal expenditures for payment as of July 31st, 2019. Mr. Nord, I need a motion for approval.
Yes, I'd like to approve.
Thank you.
Second.
Mr. Nord.
Per the minutes, the mayor stated that the expenses presented have already been approved through a prior council's action. So we're not approving the expenses at this time. Since the expenses have already been approved, then I don't quite understand exactly what we're voting on. If at the council meeting, council members have no impact on the expenses presented, then we're kind of wasting our time being here because we're approving something that's already been approved. If the policy is for the council to blindly just approve these expenses because they have occurred, then we're expected to kind of just rubber stamp vote that yes, the expenses did occur. So if we're not voting to approve them, then, I'd like to see that the text change as to what we're actually doing. We're just approving that there are text and numbers on the expense report. Or we just remove this from the town council meeting altogether.
When this came up last meeting, Mr. Nord, I did talk about that issue, the fact that, yes, these bills are approved, and they're within the city council, or I'm sorry, the city manager's purview of spending, her authority of $25,000 and under, and everything else was done by council action. I had the same inclination that you did, but after checking with our auditors, and I did bring this up the last time, our auditors recommended that we keep it on as an indication that the council indeed had seen the bills and had looked at the bills, and that was formalized by a vote, and that's why we did that. I would tend to agree with you that if we're not approving them because they're already paid, then why are we voting on them? But that was the auditor's recommendation, so that's why we're doing that.
That doesn't quite seem logical.
I'm not an auditor, Mr. Nord. I would tend to agree with you a little bit, but that is for openness of our bills, so people can see it, and acknowledges that the council indeed has seen those bills.
Okay, my understanding of how a budget works is you budget to approve to spend X amount of dollars, and that the expenses then we look over to see if we're actually getting what we expect to get. And if that's not the case, and we are simply just approving something that was already approved, then we need to change the text to say exactly what we are voting yea or nay to.
Mr. McCarthy.
You just touched on it in the last comment you made after I raised my finger, but just to reiterate, I think for public transparency, it's really important that we show the people what their money's being spent on. So regardless of what the intent is, I think it's important that every council meeting that the public gets to see what the bills are. I think it's also important that we look at them, whether or not we vote on them. I think, that's another topic altogether, but that the public gets to see them at least every council meeting, that what we are in fact spending money on, and that, we're looking at them to cursory to make sure that they're lining up with what we vote on during the budgeting process. Which is when we approve all of these things. So they all, in fact, do get approved, all these expenditures. They just happen during the budgeting process. This is our opportunity to review those, to see. But point in fact, they have already been approved during the budget cycle. So, whether or not we actually have to vote on them or not, I'll leave that up to the auditor and our council. But I think it's important that they stay in the public and public continue to get to see them.
Thank you. Further on the item? Please call the roll.
Mr. Nord?
I'm still unclear as to what we're voting on.
Approval of town of normal expenditures for payment as of July 31st, 2019.
Okay, they were already approved, so I'm going to abstain from this because they were approved. I have no impact or bearing on them.
Please call the roll.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The town of normal expenditures are approved. Item C is a resolution waiving the formal bid process and executing a 3-year agreement with All City Management Services Incorporated for school crossing guards management services. Mr. Nord.
I approve.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Mr. Nord.
I'm just going to read what Karen had written. The agenda item for the crossing guard services. I remember speaking with the police chief during orientation, and he commented over how well this service performed compared to having the police personnel provide this service for such truncated hours. I am in favor of this contract renewal, but I would ask that this company consider working with Mark First and Unit 5 school system to determine whether special needs individuals could fill some of these posts. I have seen school children providing crossing guard services at Colleen Hoos, and if elementary age children are capable of this task, I would like the opportunity provided to special needs citizens to see if they could serve in this capacity.
Thank you.
Can that be relayed, please?
Yes, I had responded to Ms. Smith's email and indicated that we certainly would share that information with all cities, with the contractor, presuming council authorization of this agreement tonight. But I did want to clarify that that Unit 5 is not, in fact, using children for crossing guard services. They did have some assignments for the 5th graders, but ceased that 3 years ago. And the crossing guard services that we are responsible for, that we contract with, are areas for busy areas in terms of traffic. For example, at Sugar Creek, Colleen Hoos Elementary School, That's right in Vernon Avenue, where the kids cross immediately in front of the school. Another location would be for Oakdale Elementary School at Hovey and Adelaide intersection. For Fairview School, it involves Rab and School Street, so some busy intersections and busy roadways. So just to clarify that there have not been school-age children involved in those kind of crossing services, but certainly we will pass Ms. Smith's thoughts along to all cities.
Further on this item? Please call the roll.
Mr. Nord?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The resolution is approved. Item D is a resolution authorizing the execution of an intergovernmental agreement with Illinois State University pertaining to fire protection service. Mr. Nord?
I approve.
Second.
Mr. Nord?
With this one, part of it's mine, part of it's Karen's, but I'll start with Karen's. Since the state has released capital funding for ISU and other universities, this means that ISU could build their own services. This is a one-year contract. We should know or be aware if ISU is planning to create their own fire service, because the location of that will have an impact on our fire service. Does that make sense, what she was asking?
I
Treasurer?
interpreted her question differently. I thought she was talking about the potential capital investment at Illinois State University in terms of the future addition of buildings and facilities and how that might impact our fire service. I am completely unaware of ISU having any consideration for building their own fire department. That would be something completely out of the ordinary, and I would hope that ISU would talk to us about that impact if they did. ISU Board of Trustees just adopted this agreement last week on July 26th at their board meeting, so I presume if there was any kind of conversation about them creating a fire department, that would have been part of their conversation before adopting this. So not sure I can respond to that, but my interpretation of Ms. Smith's email was relevant to the state of Illinois adopting a capital bill and the potential of capital investment at Illinois State and the addition of buildings and how that potentially would impact our service or this agreement. And specifically in that regard, the agreement between Illinois State and Town of Normal is not dependent on the number of facilities or the number of calls for service. It is basically a formula that's been applied across the state of Illinois between university communities and the institutions, and that formula is adjusted every year based on some analysis that is conducted by Illinois Municipal League, and it's adopted throughout the state. So if Illinois State adds a building or demolishes a building, our agreement for that year does not change. But it is a one-year agreement, that is true.
Yeah, I think it was the one-year agreement because there's a significant investment that the town has, and if the agreement's just for 1 year, it'd be nice if that agreement were longer, because then we can make long-term decisions based on a longer-term agreement.
Right. This agreement, though, is dependent upon state appropriation, which is only done 1 year at a time, and so that's the limitation on this agreement.
Okay. Then another question I had, have we ever gone back and looked at, say, what our expenses were last year for offering this service to see what it actually cost the town, if we're, I guess, making money or losing money on that?
No, we have not.
Could we do that at some point, just so we can see if this is a good formula for our community?
Should we do it for our entire community? Illinois State University is in our community. Should we analyze all our calls for service
I'm
for
just
every
saying-
citizen in the town of Normal? Would that be a more fair way of addressing that?
It's just this one contract we're talking about, but Kathleen's got a question.
Thought we'd let somebody else speak, if I may. I just want to put in a word of caution here about the fact that we do find ourselves as a university community, and that is a very special designation. With it comes perhaps some additional expenses, this being one of them, but also the university provides us quite a bit of boost to our economy and to our culture. I would not favor anything that would at all put in jeopardy the care and concern and response time to 18 to 22-year-olds who live here in a concentrated area for 9-10 months out of the year. College students, especially these days, are known to have a significant amount of mental health stress-related issues, and I would want the very best fire and EMS responding to them. And I would not favor anything that would put that in jeopardy.
Further on this item?
If I could make one clarification, I had indicated to Mr. Nord and Ms. Smith that the formula, and actually to council moments ago, the formula is applied across the state. There's one exception for university communities, and that is Champaign-Urbana. They don't have this agreement with University of Illinois and their municipalities because University of Illinois used to have their own fire department. And a number of years ago, I can't remember when, 15, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, time flies, University of Illinois Fire Department, their own fire department, was taken over by Champaign. And so they have that, they provide service, but it used to be their department. So there is not a separate agreement. All other institutions and university communities have a similar agreement as this.
Further?
Just that the goal isn't really to change the surface, it's just to find out how we're doing. If we don't know our expenses, we don't know if we're overcharging ISU or not. You know, it may be to their benefit.
I think if we do that, we certainly can devote staff time to that kind of analysis, but I'm not sure what the outcome would be. To what end? Would we then attempt to try to negotiate our own kind of agreement with Illinois State? Whereas since 1970, we've been using this formula, and I'm not sure to what outcome. So if council wants staff to dedicate their time to that kind of analysis, and we could do it across the board, or we could do it only for Illinois State, but to what end are we, what's our end goal? And so staff knows, and we can put that whole package together.
Not seeing any such request. I know
Yeah, well-
you, Mr. Nord, I know you were requesting
You have,
that.
there's really no way to gauge what the outcome is going to be unless you know your costs. I mean, you don't know what you're looking for. It may be a non-issue, it may not. I'm not asking that we do it, I'm just asking if we ever have done this. So if we never
And we have
have,
not.
in the future, we may consider it whenever we've got time.
Please call the roll.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mr. Nord?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The resolution is approved. Item E is a resolution waiving the formal bid process and authorizing the execution of a contract with Just-in-Time Pool and Spa Service in the amount of $132,460 for the Fairview Family Aquatic Center Zero-Depth Entry Pool Resurfacing Project. Mr. Nord?
I approve.
Thank you. Mr. Nord?
It seems odd that no one would bid on this service. Could you explain a little as to why this service, which I think would be very common, is hard to get people to bid on?
For the record, Mr. Nord, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Wasn't this question not answered in detail in an email sent to you earlier today?
There are two that were not
Not questioning your
answered.
reason to go forward, was that not answered to you in an email earlier today by City Manager Pam Reese?
No,
You did not receive an email?
I did receive an email. But part of this is also for educating the public as well.
Thank you. That's all I needed to know. Proceed, I'm sorry.
Thinking what your question was, in terms of if it was unusual or out of the ordinary to get no bids.
Yeah.
Well, we tried twice, and we were disappointed to get no bids, no responses through this formal bidding process. I don't know about how common this type of service is, but it was the Diamond Bright service that we are recommending be reapplied to the Fairview Pool zero depth area. Has performed exceptionally well for us, which is why we would like to move forward with the same kind of surface. We believe through conversations and sort of anecdotally that one possible reason on why we didn't get any bids and the 2 times we did put the project out for bid is because perhaps that the contractors that focus on this type of service are generally in the Chicagoland area, and perhaps they didn't feel it worthwhile to go through a formal bidding process for a downstate community. Perhaps they work typically with some subcontractors and have good relationships with them, and maybe have different relationships with downstate subs, or maybe no formal relationships. We're not exactly sure. But because we attempted to seek bids twice and were unsuccessful with any response, we then moved forward with a quotation. And we were able to get Just-in-Time Pool and Spa to respond to us. They're actually the company that we talked to over a year ago when we were working on a budget number for this project. And our budget, the number they gave us a year or so ago was $132,000. We budgeted $140 just to be safe, our typical conservative budgeting approach. And when we talked to Pool and Spa, Just-in-Time Pool and Spa this time, they did return with the same number that they offered us in terms of an estimate a year ago. Not our ideal approach to procurement, certainly. But because of timing and because our confidence in them, we are asking council to move forward with just this one quotation for the service. We have explored references, and we have had very good reference with Just-in-Time Pool and Spa, as well as the plaster company subcontractor that they intend to use for the service, so we're very confident in that.
Mr. Preston?
Since it is already pulled, I would like to give a shout out to Parks and Rec staff, who seems to have managed over the preceding years and actually decades to make the pool surface that we are replacing, which had an expected lifespan of 8 to 12 years, for making that last us an entire 23. That is about double its lifespan, and as a result, that's a good use of money. When we originally, made that purchase 23 years ago, thanks to Parks and Rec staff for always staying on top of things and not only creating great places but also doing so in a fiscally responsible and way that just makes a lot of sense.
Thank you. Further on this item? Mr. McCarthy?
Yeah, well, while we're extrapolating a little bit, I'm going to reach into my ancient history a little bit for the conversation, but spending nearly 10 years in pools as a high school student and a college student in the north suburban Chicagoland area, if you spend any time around pools up there, what you're going to find out is that there's way more pools than there are available contractors to do all the work, and park districts and the like sometimes have to wait years to get actual services done to some of their pools. A lot of the park districts up there and municipalities do a lot of their own work, but in the 2 different municipalities that I worked in, one was a park district, one was a municipality, either if they couldn't do it in-house, sometimes they had to wait multiple years to get a contractor to actually be able to deliver the service because, again, there's way more work than there's capacity of the contractors up there. That may still be the case. It was a long time ago. But as long as we're hypothesizing about things, that is something I know to be true about contractors in the Chicagoland area.
Thank you. Further on this item?
I'd just like to read Karen's question or comments. I would not be in favor of approving this bid until more due diligence is performed to validate the company's quote. Their bid has no detail of time required to complete each of the tasks outlined, so we have no information as to whether their hourly rates are reasonable. I do not believe that simply matching the quoted budget amount is sufficient justification for accepting this bid. As was demonstrated in last month's quote for a town project, a Chicago company had a quote for more than double that offered by the local contractor. If this product is as good as it is purported to be, the vendor should be more helpful in providing assistance in identifying other qualified installers. If that is not possible, then my recommendation would be to go with an alternative product. The State Farm pool surely needs maintenance, and they have 3 outdoor pools. Could you not contact someone associated with those pools for recommendation?
Thank you. Comment noted. Further on the item? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Lorenz,
Aye.
Mr. Preston,
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy,
Aye.
Mr. Nord,
Aye.
Mayor Kus.
Aye. The resolution is approved. Item F is a resolution to accept bids and award a contract to Stark Excavating Incorporated for the 2019 sump pump discharge and storm sewer improvement project in the amount of $575,000. Mr. Nord?
I approve.
Thank you.
Second.
Mr. Nord?
This is more for public education. I guess let me get to the point that she wanted to talk about. She agrees with the selection of Stark for this project, but could further detail be provided about the amount of work that might be provided to individual properties experiencing this problem? Since her neighborhood is one that's impacted by the issue, and to avoid charges of favoritism, what process will be used for identifying properties which are served by this product, by this project? And over what period of time will these dollars be expended? Because she's going to have lots of questions from the folks in the neighborhood.
Sure, I am going to ask City Engineer Ryan Otto to come forward. In the meantime, I'll talk a little bit while he walks up. Is that okay if I answer?
Absolutely.
Okay. And now Ryan's here, but I will mention.
Excuse me just a moment.
I have a point of order clarification. Is it acceptable and within rules to be a proxy for another member who's not here? I've not seen this happen before, and just am curious if this is legit.
Mr. Day?
Any of the members can raise inquiries, so as long as, Mr. Nord can raise inquiries on behalf of other people, as long as he's the one raising them. If a member just wanted to submit a letter or something, then that wouldn't be appropriate.
Okay,
but-
just making sure. I've not seen this happen before.
Ms. Reese?
Well, now I'll just turn it over to Mr. Otto, who can explain a little bit about how properties are selected for participation. And I will point out that this project will go over 2 fiscal years, actually, so it will conclude next July.
Sure. So the engineering department has collected comments from citizens over time. We have some locations identified already. Those are prioritized based on severity, safety concerns. One thing we see a lot, and folks in many neighborhoods can relate to the fact that we have a lot of water coming across sidewalks, especially in the winter. You get icing. Obviously is a safety concern for sidewalks. So we prioritize locations based on concern, citizen requests, funding, physical constraints. In some cases, there is no storm sewer system that we need to tie into for this type of project, or it's a larger type of improvement that we have to do in order to get drainage to a neighborhood that's not within the scope of this contract. So there's a lot of factors that go in. As far as locations and how many we might get to, right now we don't know that until we get into the projects. Each location is unique. For instance, we may have a home with a sump pump discharge that's causing issues on the sidewalk or curb that we have to install 300 feet of pipe to get to, or it may be a quick hit, or so to speak, so that we only have to install 50 feet to solve the problem. So based on what constraints we actually find on site will influence over time how much we intend to get to. We hope to start in August and then continually work with the contractor to work through these locations over time. I think the contract is supposed to end up sometime next summer.
And, Mr. Ott, if you could also explain that in terms of the town's obligation, our purpose is to get the storm sewer basically near the property line so they can tie into it?
Thank you, Ms. Reese, that's correct. We have, the locations usually come in two forms. Areas where the sump pump is discharging right at the sidewalk or in the right-of-way, or areas where it's discharging somewhere near the house or in the backyard. Our practice is to hook up sump lines that come to the sidewalk area or within close range where we're at. Our practice is not to go back into people's backyards on the private side. So in that case, we would supply the line and a T within the line for the homeowner to connect to in the future.
Thank you very much. I know that Karen's watching, and there's lots of her neighbors that are watching as well. So for them, thank you for explaining this. But for the ones that are just realizing this, who should they contact if they have questions about possibly the timing that they should get their contractor involved to coordinate tying in while Stark's doing the work?
Sure. We will coordinate with homeowners as we're going along. So there's a lot of interaction with our citizens as we build these. Our engineering staff will be out working with the contractor, knocking on doors, talking to folks as they go. We'll also potentially be sending letters depending on how many people are impacted, but folks will be notified when there is a T hookup available.
Good. Well, I applaud you for the knocking on the doors and going the extra effort to make sure that they're aware. Thank you.
Thank you.
I've had a lot of complaints from my neighborhood as well. So I guess this is a good thing we're doing this. And so for those who might inquire to me about this project and, if their area will be addressed, what would be the best way for a citizen to find out if their area is on the priority list?
We would ask that they contact the engineering department.
Okay.
We may or may not know about the problem.
Okay.
So when we receive a problem, it goes on our sump pump discharge possibility list, for lack of a better term. And again, we prioritize all those locations based on need.
So call engineering. Thank you.
Further on this item? Please call the roll.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mr. Nord?
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The resolution is approved. Item G is an ordinance establishing parking restrictions along both sides of Shelbourne Drive from School Street to Charlotte Drive for the implementation of bike lanes. Mr. Nord?
I approve.
Second.
Thank you. Mr. Nord?
For public education, Pam, I'd asked, or Ms. Reese, I'd asked, if we make this bike lane, a dedicated bike lane, does this increase the town's liability and the maintenance standards that we have to maintain a bike lane up to versus just a street?
Versus just street pavement? The answer to that is yes, it does. It does require more maintenance. That is just the case in the state of Illinois and every municipality that has bike lanes. I'll defer to Mr. Day, who might be able to expound a little bit further on liability issues.
Yeah, and again, it's a very fact-specific situation. There may be increased liability. You have to maintain a bicycle lane in satisfactory condition for a bicycle rather than for a car. So there may be some increased maintenance or liability involved with that. That might be offset by general safety, traffic concerns. Having bikes in their dedicated lane may offset some of that liability. There's other factors, other immunities, depending on where your bike lane, bike path is, that may come into play as well. But typically, there is some increased liability exposure with bike lanes, the same you have with, say, sidewalks or other dedicated paths.
Thank you.
Thank you. Then my concern, it's not this is a bike issue. My wife, many friends are, bike advocates. They bike all the time. But my concern is twofold. One, The bike plan that this is based on is over a decade old, and it's scheduled to be updated this year. So without the current research, we don't know how many bikes actually use this route or if this route is still needed until that research is done. The second concern I have is if you drive around town, our streets are pothole ridden. We're not able to maintain our streets already. So if we can't afford to keep our current roads maintained just for vehicle standards, and since we're failing at maintaining the roads and lanes that we currently have, we can't afford, nor would it be fiscally responsible to add to the maintenance burden by adding additional bike lanes that do require more maintenance. Priority-based spending is the way that I look at things. And we only have a limited amount of money. So we must put that money towards our critical infrastructure needs first before we expand to other things.
Let me answer the first part of your question, Mr. Nord, in the sense that when you design a bike route, it's not to accommodate the traffic that's already there. It's to accommodate movement north, south, east, and west through your community, so you have a network. So, but you're right, bicyclists are probably not using that because there's parking on both sides of the road, and it's not been designated as a bike route. So that would be my take on that. The second part of your question, I'm just going to disagree with you that we can maintain our streets, and we do maintain our streets. Mr. McCarthy?
You touched on both of the issues I was going to talk about. If you've been driving around normal at all this summer, you've been inconvenienced by some road work going on. There's a significant amount, and we're doing a lot, and we do a lot every year. We have somewhere between 450 and 500 lane miles in the community, and it takes a while to get to all of those. And so, no, they don't all get addressed every year, but we do a fair amount. And like we were just jesting in the hall, summer is the time when the distance between point A and point B is under construction, and a lot of that is happening right now. The second part is, before I was on council, back in 2009, I was part of this bike and pedestrian master plan process. And, Mayor, I 100% agree with you. The idea behind a master plan like this is to create safe routes that people can use. If you look at that Summit-Shelbourne corridor, it's a direct line between, in the summer, one of the most densest population of children in our entire community and the Constitution Trail. And it's a straight pathway there. Of course, people involved in that process thought that that was a smart idea, is to move kids in a direct route to the Constitution Trail, which we all know that they use a lot of. And so whether or not it's that, I can tell you personally as a cyclist and a triathlete, we use that corridor a fair amount when we're going east-west. So it does get used. I don't know how much, but I think it's smart, and honestly, I'm glad to see we're finally getting to it. It would have been my druthers that we did this sooner because, again, one of the largest concentration of children in our community are right along that route between how they get to the pool and get home. And so I wish we would have been able to get to this sooner. Budget is what budget is, but I'm very, very excited and enthused that we're finally getting to this.
Further on this item? Please call the roll.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mr. Nord?
No.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. The ordinance is approved. Item H is an ordinance repealing the adoption of the 2015 International Energy Conservation Code, Municipal Code Section 11.4-1G. Mr. Nord?
My concern with this,
Do I have a motion for approval?
I approve.
Second.
My concern with this is, well, first a question. Are we currently able to inspect that this code is being followed?
Well, Mr. Trumbull was preemptive and got up here before I even asked him to come up and join us, so I'm going to defer to Mr. Trumbull to answer these questions.
Yes, sir, we are. And by the action we are able to enforce or inspect is because we choose to adopt the actual International Energy Conservation Code, even though it came through a state mandate. And so I can elaborate on that if other questions pop up, but that is our legal authority, is the town council's action to actually proactively and consciously adopt this code.
I thought we were voting on,
We're
Not-
voting to repeal.
To repeal.
The 2015 edition, which per the state act, does not allow a community or municipality to maintain an older edition of the code. And so there's a new edition of the code that was produced and became effective July 1, and it's essentially the 2018 Energy Conservation Code. And so the primary goal of this action, or this request before the council tonight, is to basically take the town out of hock with the state's act and get the 2015 off the books. And then we're happy to have a further discussion about moving forward.
Right, Mr. Trumbull has summarized, if council doesn't support staff's recommendation, the alternative would be, we would have to then adopt the 2018, because we can't function under the 2015 code. And the 2015 code is what we're currently enforcing. And we would ask council to rescind this code, and we would get out of the enforcement business, and that would actually be in alignment with the city of Bloomington as well.
Can you elaborate why
Is that
the
true?
2018 code is problematic?
Sure. And so, and again, I apologize for the report because there was a lot of chronology and a lot of moving parts in there. But essentially, like in 2004, the state of Illinois, the Capital Development Board, created the Energy Efficient Act that applied to commercial buildings. Okay, and it was a state mandate. They don't have manpower or field personnel to come out and enforce this. I think the expectation is that if and where a municipality has the ability to do that, they can. They don't have to. As the act was amended in subsequent years, in fact, in 2009, they took it to the next level and included residential construction. Okay, and so at that time, the town was not adopting or enforcing an energy conservation code. And again, I know it probably gets lost, buried in the text in the report, but so when that became effective on January 1st of 2010, the residential element, some council may recall at that time, one, we were just getting started in our recession. It's quite difficult, after 2009. Also, the International Residential Code at that time had also introduced sprinkler systems in single-family construction. Mm-hmm. And so with a very fragile construction environment in 9 and 10 and for the several years afterwards, and I would still argue a little bit today, in concert with the city of Bloomington, both councils agreed to defer and not require the sprinkler system mandate per the code. Several reasons there. I mean, we have a great fire service. We don't have a great experience with a lot of lost homes in our community, which again, knock on wood, is a good thing. But that was also dovetailed with this concept that the state of Illinois created this act requiring new home construction comply with an energy conservation code. And at that time, the home building industry was arguing that was adding anywhere from $4,000 to $7,000 to the cost of a home 9-10 years ago. State mandate, and again, so about a year after that was in place, the actual home building community, Bloomington Normal Home Builders Association, through a fall luncheon where we get the two communities together and talk through what's going on in the community. They basically kind of made the request that would the town and city consider formally adopting the code to essentially level the playing field. I think the argument at the time was that some builders were taking it upon themselves to comply with the act, others weren't. And so without the benefit of a quote-unquote state police department to come in and basically regulate or check to make sure that everybody was playing by the same rule book, the town, presumably the city was going to follow suit. They didn't. But the town adopted the energy code in 2010. And so, again, generally speaking, every 3 years, new sets of codes, the whole library of codes, not just the energy conservation building codes, mechanical codes, they're produced every 3 years. And pretty historically, in my career anyway, over the past 35 years, we have generally adopted the most recent edition of published codes. And so that is in part why we adopted the subsequent 2012, 2015 codes, and that's how we have the 2015 on the books right now. It was part of a library of I-codes that we developed, or adopted and brought to council, like we have historically, every 3 years for the past 30 years. So as mentioned in my report, there's a lot of different things going on in our building world here. I mean, I would still argue that our construction environment, specifically single-family housing, is still pretty fragile. We're never going to go back to the days of building 200 and 300 houses a year in normal, and twice that in Bloomington. As mentioned, our organization is going through a pretty substantial software implementation process. And then again, not to bore you with all the minutia, but the idea is our staffing model has changed a bit over the past several years through budget, and will continue to adapt. And so we're going to be looking to press on some of our inspection staff to pick up some other duties as we move forward into the next few years. And so those in combination are why we are not in a position right now where we are bringing or reviewing the 2018 codes. It's not to say that if we came back to council, whether it's this fall or early next year at some point, having reviewed all of the 18 codes, mechanical, building, fire, property maintenance, residential, this would be one layer in that. So I know that's a lot more than you probably care to hear, but that is in part where we're at and why I bring this action to you tonight, or request to you tonight, is to essentially to get us out of hock, not that anybody's breathing down our neck, but essentially we don't want to have a code on our books formally that's contrary to the state act.
Thank you.
If we take this off the books, does that mean we're no longer going to inspect for energy efficiency? Is that what that means?
That would be my position, yes.
So then we'll have homes that are built that contractors won't have to abide by, well, they'll have to abide by the state rule, but there's no enforcement.
Correct.
Unless the state comes in.
Correct.
So then an unsuspecting property owner comes into town, they buy a place, for some reason the state decides to inspect their property, and it doesn't meet the state's code, but we've issued the permit. Now the homeowner's stuck arguing with the state that their house doesn't meet this code, but they got all the proper permits from the town.
Okay.
That's
a very real scenario. And it's not in my estimation, it's not a problem for the town of Normal because it's not an adopted code by the town of Normal.
Well, if we adopt it, then the state would have to talk with the town of Normal as to why they interpreted the code to allow that to pass, which
Correct.
puts a layer
Which
of
is-
protection in for our property owners. Is that
True.
true? Is there an option that we could just outsource the testing?
That's already done. As we have been operating up until July 1st, because again, we had proactively adopted the energy code, and we were doing field inspections. We would, through plan review, request a submittal for a res check or a com check, which is vernacular for just having the builder or contractor tell us, how are you going to meet the energy code? We receive that, and as the projects are being built, various elements of the construction are looked at and evaluated by inspection staff. And essentially at the end of the project, it's a little different between commercial and residential, but there is in residential they call it a blower door test, which is done by a third-party testing agency. They submit a certificate thus saying it passed, and then essentially the same type of process happens on the commercial, just at a more grand level. So that's how we've been operating for the past 6 or 7 years. Moving forward, we would basically, like we did prior to this becoming a state act, we would identify on a plan review and say, as a reminder, you are obligated to comply with the state of Illinois' Energy Conservation Code, and leave it at that. And again, because it's not adopted on our books, there's no burden for somebody to comply with something that's not adopted and enforced by the town. And quite honestly, Mr. Norden, and hopefully I'm not coming across as argumentative, it's just, Normal's very unique. Most communities do not adopt the Energy Conservation Code. They basically take the approach that it's out there, here's a reminder, it's your burden to comply, and kind of wash their hands of it. So again, really our action to adopt years ago was at the request of the Home Builders Association to kind of level the playing field in Bloomington Normal. And so really, as we exist right now, with the fact that technically Bloomington hasn't adopted it. And so a builder could argue and say, well, Normal has, they're going to be watching. It's going to be more expensive for us to build in Normal than it is in Bloomington. They may go to Bloomington and build as opposed, so.
So our peers like Peoria, Champaign, Urbana, Decatur, Springfield, they don't adopt,
I
they didn't
can't
adopt these
speak
codes?
for all of them specifically, but I know Peoria, I think, chooses to adopt. But beyond that, for the most part, most other comparable central Illinois and downstate communities, and even in the Chicagoland area, most of them are not adopting this proactively.
So last question, for the taxpayer's point of view, or the homeowner, property owner, what is the benefit to them for us to approve what you're requesting? And
There is no quote-unquote benefit to them. This is essentially for the town's sake to get us, again, it's not, I don't have a letter from the Capital Development Board saying you have the 2015 on the books, you're in violation of the state act. This is a proactive measure to just take us back into compliance with regard to the state act. And then again, as mentioned, we haven't moved forward with the 2018 Library of Codes like we ordinarily would for the reasons I stated before. The trick here, and it's touched on in the report, is that the International Code Council, which is the author essentially of all of our model codes that we adopt and enforce, there's not a mandate. They don't say that when we put a new edition out that you have to adopt it and enforce it. It's always a choice. In fact, lots of communities are on, and this may not mean anything to anybody, but there's lots of communities that are still on the BOCA codes, which are dissolved in 1999, but are, and not supported, but it's still a book that a community can maintain on the. And so lots of communities maintain and adopt older editions of codes for lots of different reasons. However, the way the state act is structured, that is not an option. It basically says when the newest edition of the Energy Conservation Code becomes available, that is the rule book. And it doesn't give a community a chance to say, well, we want to stay on something older or different, so.
Mr. McCarthy?
We're reducing staff here shortly.
Yeah.
Yes, we'll be down another position in inspections with
In
the upcoming
October, yeah, we're
retirement.
gonna, as part
Which
of
is
the recent budgeting process, we.
Part of our budget reduction process. So
Yeah, so
the
we're
direct
yeah.
benefit to the citizens of Normal is that we reduced the budget a year and a half ago, $2.5 million. And we made some hard decisions about retirements and reducing the number of positions. And this is one of those cases. We've been talking in the fine print about codes, but I wanted to pull the lens back up and remind everybody that this body, or the majority of this body that was here at that time, made some hard decisions about cutting $2.5 million or so out of the budget. And staffing was a large part of it, and with fewer staff comes these things. Question, do we know, for either one of you, Bloomington's immediate plans? Are they changing course at any time? Do we know?
No, in our conversations with Bloomington, they had never historically formally adopted the code. They have taken the same approach, basically, and received like a res check or the com check, and
Okay.
performed a few field inspections. And again, I don't know if that was out of just essentially trying to be consistent with us. Council knows that Normal, generally speaking, not just here in Bloomington Normal, but certainly in downstate Illinois, has
Yeah.
been generally pretty progressive. And more often than not, we're the first to actually adopt the new edition of the code. And Bloomington many times will follow suit. And honestly, for quite a period of time, we were on the same set of editions for a while, but I know they're on the 2012 series right now. So.
Ms. Lorenz?
A couple questions for you, Mr. Trammell, if you would, please. Quick question on the Builders Association. Are they aware of this potential repeal? And
Yes.
Okay, and how do
Yeah.
they feel about that?
I think they're taking the fifth,
Okay,
meaning, again, 9 years ago when they proactively asked us to step
Right.
in, it was a little bit of a different building environment.
Sure.
Maybe not as challenged as it is now, working its way toward that. But certainly, even when we did, at their request, adopt this, you know, they weren't unanimously like, yeah, you know, because again, it's an
adds.
expense. It's going to add
Right.
$5,000 to $6,000, $7,000 to the average cost of a home. I have to be careful a little bit too, is that, as mentioned in the report, the energy code is one of 12 layers in our library of codes that come into play across construction in the community. And as mentioned, you know, most of our codes are oriented around structural, building safety,
Right.
mechanical, gas systems, electric, plumbing, safe water, that kind of thing. And not to minimize the importance of an energy code, but it is not really a life safety type element.
That was actually
And
where I
so,
wanted, yeah.
you know, certainly in the discussion when we talked about the sprinkler system,
Yeah.
discussion back in 2009 and 10.
And then again in 12.
You know, so to answer your question, they still understand that technically speaking, they're still on the hook to comply with the state's
Right.
act.
Well, that's where I
you
wanted
know,
to go next, if you would, please. So this is just one set of codes, and, you know, for those of us that don't live in your world every day, it's good to clarify that this is one of a dozen or so codes, and it's not the codes that are life safety. It's not the codes that are structural or mechanical. And so, like you said, not to minimize these, but what I'm hearing and offer up for consideration as we take a vote on this is that I'm hearing that this was a bit of an unfunded mandate that came from the state. And, you know, that always raises a little flag in my head. And then pops in the word, you know, regulation and perhaps over-regulation. And so, you know, given the environment where we are today, where we're at, you know, a couple of dozen new housing starts instead of a couple of hundred, it's a very different environment than it was, you know, 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago. So I tend to think that perhaps pulling back some regulation might not be a bad thing in the spirit of keeping government trim and efficient as possible. And as long as we are certain that this is not impacting life safety or any kind of structural soundness of the structures going up in the town of Normal, I tend to think that on energy efficiency, that's something that the capital forces market forces might take care of themselves, because as a would-be buyer, you know, I'm going to want to make sure, if it's important to me enough, that that there are energy efficiencies and that the windows are, you know, a certain rating and that the insulation is another rating and so forth. And so where I could absorb a $5,000 to $6,000 or $7,000 increase, I may choose to do that because I see it as an investment down the road. And that's what I mean about market forces taking care of something like this. So I tend to understand where you're coming from. It sounds a little scary to be repealing codes, and I think that may be the issue that Mr. Nord is raising. But under the circumstances, I wanted to throw that other light out there that, you know, unfunded mandates and overregulation are two things that make me squirm. So if we can unlayer some layers without, you know, jeopardizing safety and structural soundness, I can understand your line of thinking.
Thank you. Further, Mr. North.
If we repeal this, it doesn't take the regulation off the table. It just means that the state is going to be enforcing it. You still are required to build up to the 2018 codes. Is that correct?
Correct.
So all this is doing is just moving the onus of ensuring to property owners that the town is doing that, I guess, oversight piece that now the state is, and the state's not really enforcing it anyway. Yeah. There's a energy company that was pretty prominent in Bloomington Normal a few years ago, and they had told me stories that they would go into homes where they do like energy efficiency and improve the energy efficiency, because really that is where you get the grand savings, is how your home's built, the insulation in the walls, how tight it is, going up in the attics and sealing things off. So what they had mentioned, even in some of these really nice homes, like in Hawthorne, they would go in with their thermal cameras, pointed at the wall, and you could see where the insulation came down and stopped 3 or 4 feet. And you know, these are homes that are built. So you go in to buy a home, to my knowledge, there's no way to go back and look to see how a home was built, if it was built to regulation, whatever. They just receive permits and possibly inspected, possibly not inspected. Is that true
From an energy perspective.
from an energy perspective?
I mean, if we have records in our files that indicate we did insulation inspections and verified window U values and envelope and ceiling insulations and equipment efficiencies, that's going to be there.
That is all there. But
Yeah.
then if we repeal this and the town's no longer doing it, that will not be there.
It'll be there for the ones that we inspected.
Well, for anyone's being built,
New construction.
Yeah, new
Right.
construction.
For
Point
any-
taken, yeah.
for any new construction.
Yeah.
All right. So that's my concern. Thank you.
Yeah.
Further on this item? Please call the roll.
Mr. Nord,
No.
Mrs. Lorenz,
Aye.
Mr. Preston,
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy,
Aye.
Mayor Kus.
Aye. The ordinance repeal is approved. We have no general orders. One item of new business, which is an ordinance amending the liquor code concerning pickup and delivery of alcohol service locations and movie theater licensing.
Move approval.
Second.
Questions or comments on this one? Please.
Just clarifications. If I understand this correctly, there are two changes to be made to this classification, is that correct? One around the delivery piece and the other around the allowance of movie theaters?
Yes.
Okay. That's all I have.
Please call the roll.
Mr. Nord,
Aye.
Mrs. Lorenz,
Aye.
Mr. Preston,
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy,
Aye.
Mayor Kus.
Aye. The ordinance is approved. Before taking a motion for adjournment, are there comments or concerns? Mr. McCarthy?
Yeah, just shout out to town staff, Parks and Rec. There was the beer festival that happened on the streets of Uptown, and happened to get there towards the tail end. We had just gotten back into town from some vacation and stopped in to enjoy the street life in Uptown for a little bit. But for the first time of a street fair, I happened to be there after it ended to watch all the staff that come out at night after our citizens go away, and magically in about an hour and a half or so, all this work happens and all these staff members come out and start tearing stuff down. We have Children's Discovery Museum folks and Public Works folks and Parks and Recs folks that are out there working late at night to make our streets ready to go the next day. And it was, I don't know, I guess I never thought about how that all happened, but being there to see it all happen was pretty amazing. Just trucks show up and people show up and stuff starts happening, and it was pretty cool to see. So thank you for all the town staff for staying up late and coming back out after I'm sure you put your kids to bed and dinner was had, and coming back out to make that a reality. Because the feedback, once again, that I got from folks that were participating in that event were thrilled that the town of Normal does that, and not one of these goes by where I don't get a request to how can we do more of this. So big kudos to town staff. Thank you very much for your hard work.
You are correct, Mr. McCarthy. We do not have a Department of Elves.
Oh.
Ms. Lorenz?
Okay, on a different note of historic nature, I'd like to raise as a concern the issue of the proposed demolition of the what was once a little one-room schoolhouse at 4408 East Rab Road. That's Tawanda Barnes and Rab Road. Noting that the Historic Preservation Commission did actually deny the demolition request on the basis that this actually has some historic significance, although not on the National Historic Register at this point. It is one of just a few handful of one-room schoolhouses still left in our county. As I read the staff report and looked at the Historic Preservation Commission's notes about it, this could very well be a plausible location for historic preservation. However, the 30 days per the process is about to expire on the 8th of August, I believe it is, which is later this week. So this is our last public meeting. And I just wanted to raise it up on the basis that I have not heard from anybody with or associated with the property owner, the current property owner. I have not heard from anybody in the realms of historic preservation. So, this one may go. The 30 days may expire here in a few days. At this point, I would perhaps like to ask staff to maybe make one last-ditch effort to speak to the property owners and see if we can't come up with another solution of, I don't know, putting it up for sale or what have you, that might save this little one-room schoolhouse. Offered up for a concern.
All right, thank you. We will have a conversation.
Thank you.
Further comments or concerns, Mr. Nord?
Yes. I campaigned and still believe that our government, the one that we're all council members of, that our overspending is a major reason that our state and town have put such a steep financial burden of debt on the people who choose to make this community their home. Even if we take on no more debt, the existing burden will be imposed on anyone who comes or is born into this community for the next many decades. This belief and concern goes against the status quo. I'm not surprised that members of this council and staff are concerned when I go against what has been the normal routine. While I trust the information that staff recommends, I will still proactively engage to seek input from members within our community and beyond to verify what I am presented. I will ask directly on their thoughts if a decision is good for their fellow taxpayers and residents. All this money that we spend, it's all from them. To my knowledge, they did not freely donate it to the town. They expect that it's spent frugally and not wasted. They deserve to have input on how we spend it. If proactively involving taxpayers and members of this community in their government's decision-making process makes me a lone wolf, then that's a badge that I will proudly wear. I will not ask the mayor for an apology or to recant the false statements which were sent to the city of Bloomington and then shown over the media. Any gesture would be forced and hollow. It would not address my main focus, which is representing the people of Normal and trying to reduce any taxation that is not absolutely necessary. What I will ask is that we can end the distractions which take away from the issues and do the work that we were elected to do. I came to work. I didn't come to waste time and energy on rumor and gossip. The taxpayers are struggling and leaving our state and community at an alarming rate. Now, some issues that we need to address, connect. The ADA and accessibility issues were going on long before I got involved. The community has escalated this to the town council. We have kicked the can and decision back to Connect, pinning the community's hopes on the Connect to the Future work group, asking the work group to address the current issues and give a plan for the future over the course of the 5 remaining meetings is overloading them. It's a dramatic scope creep from simply addressing the most immediate problems. Many in our community continue to needlessly suffer. The public awareness regarding Connect is growing. The ADA community has been ignored for years. They have taken away service from most of our mobile home parks in Normal. They say they want riders, yet they refuse to restore bus stops to mobile home parks and refuse to add a stop for the Midwest Food Bank, who serves the needs of so many in our community. Now, our military veterans will be impacted with this dysfunction, since Connect has refused to drop our disabled, sick, and injured, and others seeking medical attention close to the entrances of our hospitals, doctors' offices, and now the soon-to-open VA clinic. Our transit system should not make it harder just because you have to take the bus. I fear if Connect cannot figure out a way to address the current needs of the transportation dependent, neither the dependent nor choice riders, and especially taxpayers, will have no confidence Connect will be capable of addressing our future transportation needs. We should direct Connect to have this work group focus solely on the current issues. We need to triage the problems of today need solved before planning for the future. This brings me to the Connect Board position. This individual is to represent the taxpayers and residents of the town of Normal. This position has been open for nearly a year. Taxpayers have been denied full representation long enough. There have been multiple people who have come forward and asked to be appointed. The reason the mayor has not appointed someone is not the question we should be asking. The community deserves their representation. The mayoral position requires certain duties to be performed. The responsibility of appointing the Connect Board is the mayor's duty. The mayor has had ample time to appoint. Therefore, I don't want to waste time asking why. Mr. Mayor, please delegate this duty to someone who will make the decision, one that is in the best interest of our transportation-dependent community. Some sitting up here say that the council's responsibility, that Connect is not the council's responsibility to be involved. The fact is, we approve the taxpayer payments to Connect. There is a contract between the town and Connect. It states we oversee Connect. Just because the council hasn't followed this for years does not change the fact that this contract is still there. Until this contract is changed, it is the one we have. We can do many things beyond appoint. One is we can decide to remove individuals from the board. We can do this with or without the mayor's approval. I'm not recommending we do this now. I'm just pointing this fact out. Saying that the number of riders is the only metric that matters for Connect is not right. It absolutely matters who we are trying to help. If we are not helping those who need it first, then our moral compass needs evaluated. Has anyone seen more than a few people on these huge buses when you drive around in town? I see at most 5 people. I mean, granted, I don't drive the ISU campus area when students are here much because I just don't work here. But Connect has said that they will listen to the work group, even if the work group recommends to get smaller buses. Yet, Connect has an RFP on their website right now for larger, heavier buses. They seem to say one thing, yet appear to be planning to do another. Finally, there are known places where taxpayer money is being wastefully overspent. Pointing these out and providing solutions which require no reduction in service and minimal staff time is considered offensive. The council, it's been recommended by the town manager that the council needs to reduce the budget in order to reduce some of the overspending pieces. I do not need to understand the reason for this process, but since this is the recommended process, we should schedule an open and transparent discussion so we can come up with an amount to reduce the budget. At my kitchen table, in business, and during my involvement in federal government, budgets could change at any time. It would be an insult to tell normal taxpayers we cannot do anything right now, and we must continue to knowingly overspend their money. This discussion will take either the support of the mayor or 4 council members. I am certain Karen will want to discuss saving taxpayer monies. Are there 2 others that are willing to discuss saving taxpayers so we can get this on the agenda?
Is there further comments or concerns? Mr. Preston.
Thanks. Mr. Nord and I are on the same page with one of the items that he had highlighted there in his comments, that being the Connect Transit Board position that has yet to be filled on behalf of the people of Normal. I have expressed this in the past, but since it was brought up, I will echo my sentiments again tonight that that position is one that I believe we should fill and fill quickly. We certainly have interested parties in it, and I think that any time we do not have full representation to the extent that we can on a larger community organization board such as this one with Connect, anytime that we do not have those seats entirely filled, it does not do full service to the people of Normal, who are not getting as much representation, as many voices at the table as they are allotted. A second concern that I'll share is revolving the underpass conversation, and the concern specifically that I guess I would have tonight is that we haven't, at least I have not heard, a tremendous amount of detail and update on that, and I know that the process was originally for WSP, who was working on that study, to come with us last fall, almost a year ago, and I do understand there have been some delays that were outside of their and the town's control, but that is a process that I would like to know kind of where it's at and where it's going, as well as where things are at with any conversations of cost estimates or funding, as that conversation progresses, making sure that it's one that continues to be shared with ultimately with decision makers and the people of Normal as well.
Further comments or concerns? Mr. Nord?
The Cultural Arts Department, there's a movie that's out that's coming on the 7th, Scramble the Seawolves. For those of you that don't know what that is, the Seawolves, you were military, so you might know more about this, but it's the most highly decorated naval air attack squadron in naval history. It was only around for just a little bit during Vietnam, but the folks that were in that, they used hand-me-down equipment, and they are the most highly decorated people from that. We actually have some of those folks in our community, and this movie came out. It was created by people from our community that had since moved away. And when it was first released in California, 11,000 people showed up for its premiere. Now it's been traveling around the country. Everything has been free, and they're telling the story of some of our military folks. The VA has picked it up, and now part of it is required viewing for folks in the VA. So if you have time, please order a ticket. There's no charge, just reserve them. But go and learn something about our veterans, because we really could not be up here without them.
Further comments or concerns? Mr. McCarthy?
I don't want to go point to point, but there was several misstatements made by Mr. Nord. I just want to address one of them. We do not overspend and misspend the taxpayer dollars. I was here, as some of the other folks that are still at this table, when we went through a very difficult, arduous process that cost people's jobs when we had to cut money out of the budget because we needed to live within our means. This body took that process and takes that process very seriously in 3 installments every single year. I will continue to participate in that process to make sure that we spend in a very transparent way, and that we seek citizen input and staff input, and that we do our best to get the most that we can for our taxpayer dollars, while continuing to be a great place where people want to live. Thank you.
Ms. Lorenz?
Yeah, Mr. North, there was a lot in that couple of minutes comment that you made. I'm wondering if you could provide maybe a summary of all the points. I was trying to take some notes, but there was a lot in there, and I think perhaps for discussion in our budget setting process, our strategic planning process, I for one would like to have a summary of your points there.
Oh no, I would be happy to share. In emails I've sent out some of these requests before, but just one example is just 1717 Adelaide.
Let's
I'll leave it
hold
at
this
that.
to comments and concerns and not back and forth. And Mr. Norton and Ms. Lorenz, if you would get together after the meeting to do that. The comments and concerns, I don't think is a place to revisit issues, but points are well made here tonight. I certainly am not faulting anybody for saying what they're saying. That's what comments and concerns are for. Motion for adjournment.
So
So moved. Second.
Please call the roll.
Mrs. Lorenz?
Aye.
Mr. Preston?
Aye.
Mr. McCarthy?
Aye.
Mr. Nord?
All right.
Mayor Kus?
Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you.
I'll state that the council did not know about the business that was interested in looking